don't have control. But the one thing that you do have control over is your attitude, your people skills, how you carry yourself, how you project yourself, how you rock and roll, how you deal with situations. It was about 23 years ago, the last that I remember anybody coming in on behalf of the county to talk to the greatest asset to people, and that was those talking nuns, if any of you were around. And it was in this room. And I think it's been some 23 years since the county, in its wisdom, thought this might be a good thing to do. So with that said, let me introduce Andre. He's an energetic presenter, a powerful communicator, and a dynamic teacher. His educational influence spans North American continent. He integrates his abilities as an improv comedian, large group facilitator, keynote speaker, and a classroom teacher to captivate and educate his audience. There are many words to define Mr. Andre Cohen: educator, student, improv comedian, speaker, activist, facilitator, coach, mentee, mentor, leader, team member, community organizer, diversity trainer, motivator, friend, and son. But the most representative would probably be Andre the Enkindled Spirit. Now, keep in mind, although I'm a lawyer, I'm Irish, and I can say a lot, he's going to share with you. So let's welcome, who wrote those words, Mr. Andre Cohen, president and founder of AM Horizon.
It's always embarrassing to hear the words that you wrote about yourself read back to you. So thank you for that. I do have to say it's a very humbling experience to be asked. For 23 years, I'm the follow-up. So whatever they did 23 years ago was that good that that's what I have to follow. So I hope it's not another 23 years before you have another message like that. But at the same time, that would be speaking highly of me, wouldn't it? Just a little bit about me. I do diversity consulting and that kind of stuff. But my day job is I'm the affirmative action officer at Anoka County, or the diversity coordinator for Anoka County. So I understand a little bit about how government works and some of the challenges that we face. Prior to that, I was a high school teacher, and I'm going to share with you a lot of the things that I learned in the classroom. My first days on the job, I thought I knew everything, and my students taught me that I knew nothing. So I had to relearn, and so some of the things that I'm going to share with you are things that they shared with me, that they helped me to understand. But before we do that, I was a teacher, and I taught to the test. And so what that means was that I would teach everything and nothing that wasn't on the test, right? So everything that was on the test, I would teach. Some people say that's good teaching, some people say it's bad teaching, but when my students took the test, what did they do? They passed, right? And so every Friday, I would have a pop quiz. Every Friday, I'd have a pop quiz, right? And so my students would be surprised. They'd be like, another pop quiz? I'm like, yes, every Friday, right? And so I would have to make sure that they knew everything before we got to Friday. So Monday through Thursday, we do everything, and then, we'd have this pop quiz that they would be surprised about. And so I want to give you a pop quiz. But to be able to do that, what must I do first? Teach you the answers. All right? So the answers go like this. Fantastic. Terrific. Great. All day long. Huh. So that's what the answers are. All right? So please stand up. So the answer is fantastic, terrific, great, all day long. All right. You really got that. that there are people accessing our system that have never accessed it before. That the economy has caused people to have to do things and act in ways that they haven't had to before. And so sometimes it's just a new experience for folks. And I always like to keep that consciousness as a part of our thinking. That as goofy as we felt doing that and asking and doing the whole dance thing, that the people we're working with also oftentimes feel that way as well. So we'll continue on. So I want to show a video, and we'll start out with the video, and I want you to watch it, and then we'll talk a little bit about what you see or what you notice in the video. I might have to turn the volume down, but here we go. So it's obvious that if what? If it worked before, it'll work again. And he's also proven that, because can we make the assumption this is not his first time doing this? Right? We can make that assumption, right? But what is he proving here? That A, it's worked before, and if I keep doing it enough, what? It'll work again. I just got to keep at it. He's like, I know it worked before. If I keep doing it, eventually I'll get what it is that I want. All right? Now, when will this behavior change? When it doesn't work. So I'm a parent, and I tell the child, this doesn't work anymore. Does the child go, oh, okay. So when will the behavior change? When the parents' behaviors change? When he figures out that it doesn't work. Right? Because the parents have already figured out this is not working. But his behavior won't change until he figures it out. Right? Now, and it's interesting. He could be 25 or 30 before he figures it out. But ultimately, he will figure out that behavior doesn't work. All right? So that's the basis of kind of how we should operate with folks. All right? Here's some of my operating tenets. People can learn, change, and grow. At any point that we no longer believe that people can learn, change, and grow, that is the point where we need to retire. Right? There are scientists and behavioralists who believe that our behaviors are predisposed to certain types of genes, and certain types of genes can dictate our behaviors, but I refuse to believe that. Why? Because I can't change my genes. So if my parents were alcoholics and it's in my genes, then I'm destined to be what? that changed my destiny, right? So people can learn, change, and grow. All human behavior is goal-directed. Everybody is trying to achieve something. Everybody is trying to work towards something. And people do what makes sense to them, even if it doesn't make sense to others, others, right? Everybody else. They're doing what they think makes sense to them. All right? And then attitude is a response to a goal. What have you been taught about attitude? What is attitude? Something you can change. What else? Your outlook, how you view things. It can be good or bad. Attitude. I was taught that attitude was a response to external stimuli, an emotional response to external stimuli, right? Attitude. Everybody has it, okay? Okay, people walk in with a preconceived attitude. So my parents were, my dad was my pastor. And on Sundays, we'd go to church from 7:30 a.m. to 11:30 p.m. We stop at 3 o'clock for chicken, not because we were black, but because chicken is delicious. So all day, Sunday, we were in church. So Friday night, I asked my dad for the car. I said, Dad, can I borrow the car? And what does my dad say because he loves me? Oh, he says, yes, he loves me. He says, yes. So I take the car out. I say my dad has what kind of an attitude? A positive attitude. And what does my dad say about my attitude? That is also a positive attitude, right? So Sunday comes along. My friend Dexter calls me at noon and says, Andre, can you pick me up for the movies at 1? What do I know about Sundays? Church. But I'm feeling really gutsy, right? I'm like, Jesus is on my side. I can, petition him. So I go over to my dad and I say, Dad, can I borrow the car? And what does my dad say to me? Not only does he say no, but he gives me a lecture too, right? So I say my dad has what kind of an attitude? A bad or a negative attitude. And what does he say about my attitude? That it's a bad or negative attitude, right? So what is it that actually determines an attitude? Your perception? The other person's perception? It starts with G, it ends in O. Some people, I'm waiting. Goal. Okay, goal, right? Your goal determines your attitude. How many people have either been a teenager or been around teenagers? Now, it's really funny. When teenagers get their goal, it's almost as if they purr. Right? They get what they want, and they are so sweet and nice, and they talk to you and say, like, and they want to snuggle up to you, right? When they get what they want. When they don't get what they want, they're like Pepe Le Pew. They stink. Right? It was just like horrible. So if I have a client or someone that is coming to me for service, and I see that they have a bad attitude or a negative attitude, what is the one thing that I know for sure? What do I know for sure? They're not achieving their goal. So my first priority is to try and figure out what their goal is. Because then I can help them. Because otherwise, I don't know what to do if I can't figure out what their goal is. All right? So an attitude is a response to a goal. So this is my family. That's me as a little baby. And then this is me with the bow tie that's almost as big as my head. It's my brother Will and my sister Crystal. And these are my grandparents. These are my uncles, and that's my dad. And then this is my family in our Cosby years. Facebook. And so this is one. This is my friend Samisha, and this is Sharon, and this is me. And Samisha is holding an Uzi, one of those Uzi guns, and to Sharon's head, and I'm holding to Sharon's head a double-barreled sawed-off shotgun. And this lady's looking terror. She's like, oh my God. So let me give some context to this picture, okay? Because the context won't make it any better, but it's just, so I'm at a concert called, and I don't know if you know what the band plays, and it doesn't really matter because the band's name will tell you the atmosphere from which we were working. And we were at a concert called Public Enemy. The name of the band was Public Enemy. So some people are shaking their heads like, yeah, I remember that, right? All right. So that's that. I am my father's son. In 1968, what was happening in the world? Civil rights was happening. What else was happening in the world? Vietnam was happening. Oh, I forgot to tell you, I'm African American. I just need to put that out there so nobody's surprised, right? And my parents were African American. In 1968, they were seniors in high school. And what event in 1968 had the most profound effect on my African American parents? The assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King. And so my father graduates from high school, and he says, I want to do something about the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King. My grandparents said, great, but do it someplace else. So my dad goes off to college, and he joins this group called the Black Panthers. Now, I don't know what you know about Black Panthers or what you think you know about Black Panthers, but primarily they were a political party. They were, one of their platforms was to raise poor people, and specifically poor black people, right? And so one of the remnants of the Panthers initiatives is something that we call the Federal School Lunch Program. The government said, Panthers, we like your program, but we don't like you. So my father became a Black Panther, and in 1970, the most amazing, incredible, beautiful thing that could ever happen to my father happened. I was born. And at that point, he realized that the revolution was no place for a family, and that the retirement plan for revolutionaries sucks. Right? So he leaves the revolution. He gets a 9-to-5 square job, and while he's at that job, he gets a call from God. Now, what happens when you get a call from God? You answer, right? I was in another session, and a man said, you run. His name was Jonah. So my father gets called to be an evangelical Pentecostal fire and brimstone Bible thumping preacher. Hallelujah, yeah. I am my father's son. So in my presentation, it might seem like we're getting a little bit political, and that is in fact the truth. Because I do have a political agenda. It's called the Constitution of the United States. It also might seem like I'm preaching to the choir. You say, I'm a good person. I'm on your side. And I'll tell you in the words of my father that the choir needs preaching too. So in my presentation, I hope I give you something to think about and also something that stirs your soul. So let's talk a little bit about diversity. If I were to ask 100 people what diversity was, how many answers would I get? 100. If I'm a teacher and I give a math problem and I get 100 different answers, what do I know didn't happen? People didn't learn, right? And as a lot of teachers like to blame the students. I like to blame the teacher. So obviously, as a teacher, I didn't teach appropriately, right? So we'll talk a little bit about this concept of diversity. What I'd like to offer you is what diversity is not first. So let's talk about what it's not. It is not political correctness. In the 90s, we did a really good job of pausing people before they said dumb stuff. Right? But what do we know about political correctness today? It's gone too far. What else? Don't treat me like YouTube. Interact with me. I'm glad you got that. What is political correctness? matter of opinion. It's what? It's what somebody else is telling you that's appropriate. And it has also become a joke. Janitors aren't janitors anymore. They are what? Custodial engineers. Right? I met I saw some people at the elevator, and they're trying to describe this guy, and they were like, it's the guy with arms. And I'm like, you mean the black guy? They're like, yeah, him, thank you. I mean, we can't even have real conversations because we don't know what words to say. I was in a training, and a woman stands up, and she says, Andre, I just want to know why all the colored people are moving into my neighborhood. And what did the audience say when she said that? Were you guys there? Right? Yeah, they were like, and why did they go? Yeah, because you're not supposed to say colored, but you can say people of color, but not colored people. But that's a whole other conversation, right? So she stands up and she says that, and they go, and I look at her, and I realize that this lady does not have a lot of stamps in her passport. That her educational experiences haven't been very vast, that she doesn't have fancy vocabulary like other people. And so what is my responsibility to her? To answer her question. That education and all that kind of stuff will come later because she was brave enough to ask a question that other people had in the room, but political correctness stopped them from asking. I've also been in conversations with people, in contact with folks who have had the right words, but as they're talking, your skin just starts crawling. Right? But they had the right words. So diversity is not about political correctness. And people often ask me, Andre, why are we always talking about black and white? Why do we keep talking about this black and white? And I tell them that we haven't learned how to we haven't learned the distributive property yet. If you don't know how to do the distributive property, you can't go on to trigonometry. You can't go on to algebra until you learn the basics of math function. And so when we talk about black and white, that's the spectrum that we've set up, and we haven't learned all the lessons that we can from there. So we got to keep talking about it until we get it. And we got to take the lessons that we learn from talking about this black and white perspective and apply it to gender issues, to apply it to sexism and homophobia. We have and religious bias. We have to take those lessons and use that as a metaphor to apply what we've learned in other places. It's also, diversity is also not blame, guilt, or fault. Do babies care who changes them? No, they don't care. You change it, they're just as happy. But be careful with those boys, because they will spray you. So it's not, diversity is not about blame, fault, and guilt. And when you lay blame, fault, and guilt on people, are they energized to help you? No. Right? I learned that from my mother. She tries to get me to do stuff. Andre! And you know what? I may even do it, but I don't like doing it. I do as much as I can to get through, but that's my family stuff. This is not therapy. Diversity is not about therapy. You do not have to cry. You do not have to think like I think. I don't necessarily want to hear your horror stories or the bad things that have happened to you. That's not my place. There are places where you can get it. Qualified professionals, right? And I encourage therapy, but this isn't that place. And diversity is also not about meritocracy. And meritocracy is that concept that if you work hard enough, you can be just like me. What's the problem with that concept of meritocracy? What if I don't want to be like you? Right? And we also know that our systems aren't set up equally to start off with. Attractive people get better jobs than us normal people. Look at all the actors and actresses, except for, Walken. Christopher Walken, that's an ugly dude. I love him, but he's just ugly. All right. So diversity is not about meritocracy. And lastly, it's not about tolerance. And my diversity counterparts get mad at me when I start talking about that. They're like, don't touch that. There are books and websites. People made their whole careers off of tolerance. tolerance mean? Putting up with. Okay, I love my sister, and I love her husband, and I love their kids. My brother-in-law came to visit. I tolerated that dude. Why? Because I knew when he was going home. What tolerance says is, I will put up with this stuff until when? I don't have to. And our community's getting less diverse. Our communities, our human relationships getting less complicated. I would have to say, no, they're not getting less complicated. And so it's not about tolerance. So Andre, you're Mr. Smarty Pants. If this is not what diversity is, what is diversity? And this is what I'd like to offer you as a way to think about and act in and live in and work with diversity. That diversity is the concept that there is dignity and honor in being human. What is dignity? It's self-respect. Okay. What's that? Treating others that way. Dignity. Pride. Okay. Is dignity something that I have or something that I can give? It is in fact both. Right? There are, and I don't know in this part of Minnesota if you have these folks, but in South Minneapolis, we have these folks that have these cardboard signs that say, "We'll work for ... right? And they're always asking for stuff, so I give them tons of stuff. Guess what I don't give them, though? Money. I don't give them money, right? Because if you feed a stray cat, they keep coming back, right? So what I do is I give them dignity. And how do I give them dignity? I talk to them. I make eye contact. I let them know that I know that they exist. When we give dignity, we're saying that I don't care what you're doing, what your background is, you have a right to exist, so I will acknowledge you. That's giving somebody dignity, right? Because if you don't give people dignity, they'll try to take it. Now, I don't know if this has happened to you, but it's happened to me, where I'm at a stoplight or a stop sign, and there's a group of teenagers crossing the street, and I would think that just by the mere fact that they're young, that they will cross the street a little bit faster than what they do, right? And I used to think it was because their pants were hanging too low. And I've seen them hike them suckers up and get going, right? But what I realized was as they were crossing the street, they would make eye contact with me. So they're walking, and what they're saying to me is, you and other adults don't ever see us or pay attention to us, but you will see me now. So they will take their dignity. What is honor? What's honor? It's respect. Honor. Integrity. Honor. Cherishing. Pride. Senator Obama. I'm downtown Chicago and I see Senator Obama. And I call him OB, as I affectionately call him OB. So I'm like, "What's up, OB?" He's like, "Hello, Andre." And so we meet and we do the hand thing he likes to do with the exploding fist. Right? I just gave Senator Obama respect. Senator Obama becomes the highest office in the land. President Obama! So, how do I greet President Obama? I don't. But if I tried to do it the way I did with Senator Obama, it might look like this. Hey! Right? Because the Secret Service would be all over me unless I was in Florida. But that's a whole other conversation. Our mom and dad, our parents, where they have the rule over us, right? Who else? The military. Servicemen and women who have done things on our behalf that we were either too chicken to or couldn't do ourselves, right? Who else have we said that we will honor? Ministers, judges, right? People who work and serve us in some way. What was that? Police and fire, right? So those are folks that we said that we will give high respect to. Now, please raise your hand if you can say yes to either of these two questions that I'm going to ask. All right? Please raise your hand if you were able to purchase a ticket or pass a test that made you eligible to be born on this planet. None of us have done anything to bring ourselves here. None of us are so great that we can create our existence from nothing. We all accepted an invitation. I don't want to think about how that invitation came. It's disgusting. But we accepted an invitation to be here. And we're all trying to figure out what it means to be human and what our purpose is. And then I looked the word human up in the dictionary, and what I found was that human has two definitions. One is a noun. It talks about being a biped, having opposable thumbs, a big brain, and a belly button. If you ever encounter a person without a belly button, be concerned. So human. And human is also an adjective. And what do adjectives do? They describe, right? They describe. And so, now, I have to say this because I got in trouble once, and I don't want to get in trouble again. There are ways. Okay, so what I'm not saying is that animals don't have feelings. I'm not saying animals don't have a soul or a spirit. I'm not saying that animals, don't have sentience. They don't know that they exist. But I am suggesting that there are ways in which I expect human beings to interact with each other that if my dog did, I would be surprised. What are some of those ways that I expect humans to interact with each other?
Verbally.
To talk verbally. What else? To be respectful. What else? To be what? To have some kind of expression. What else? To have empathy. All right? These are all things that we expect human beings to have. That if our pets did, we'd go, wow. Right? Animals live by what rules, what law? Instinct, survival, the strongest, survival of the fittest, the strongest survive, alpha, males, all that kind of stuff, right? That's what runs the animal kingdom. What runs our kingdom? The same thing, all right? Well, how many of you would consider yourselves to be a dog? What runs our kingdom? What runs how we choose to operate in society? Our interconnectedness? Choices, power, survival? It's a three-letter word. Starts with L and ends in R. We have decided as human beings there are things that we can do, but we won't. Because we're human. There are ways that we can interact with each other. There are things that, ways that we can express ourselves, but we won't. Because we're human. All right? So I want you to think about this. From the time you were born, if you were given all the dignity and honor that you deserve, not because you wore the right clothes, not because you had the right hairstyle, you had the right skin color or eye color, but just because you exist, what kind of person do you think you would be today? You don't have to answer that question, but I want you to think about it. And what if we gave people this dignity and honor and respect, not because they earned it, but because don't deserve it. Just think about that. All right? I want to talk a little bit about questions before I move on. So, respect. 5 reasons we can't get it. What's going on in the picture? A lot. She said a lot. Do as I say, not as I do. Okay. He's ignoring the kid. Okay, it's not fair. Power over. So typically, these are the 5 reasons we don't get respect. First of all, we say, do as I say, not as I do. And why does that not work? Because what? We learn by example. All right. What else? They will do what you do, no matter what you say. Right? Because people can say anything. The example of your life comes from what I see you doing. You are what you do consistently. Right? I'm not mystical. I'm not a psychic or anything. But I can tell you your future. I can tell you what your future is by looking at your friends. Your friends are who your future is. Your friends are who you are now. And it's so funny because people will be like, I hang out with this person and they steal. You know why? Because they're stealing in you. Because you're living vicariously through that person. So I don't want to go too far down that thing. We'll get back to number 2. We also say that boys will be boys. Oh, let me go back to number 1. The other part is, a lot of times when we say, do as I say, not as I do, particularly as adults, I want to know some reasons. Tell me some reasons. Don't just tell me because this is how it's always been, or just because we've done it this way. Please educate me. Give me some more information. And then I may be more likely to do what you're asking. All right? So let's go to number 3. Number 3 is boys will be boys. Well, it's always been this way. Why? Boys don't have to be boys, right? Things can change. The systems can change. And it's so funny because I had a person, some folks I was coaching, and I was in the office, and a guy came in, and he made this like really derogatory remark, and everybody in the office said, well, that's just Bob. And I'm like, really? I was like, is anybody going to talk to Bob about that? They're like, no, he's too old. He's been here a long time. This is just how he is. And I'm like, Bob is exposing us to financial liability. Anybody who heard that outside of our regular environment would give that person a cash settlement. No question. So even if we can't see what the connection is as to why we have to hold people to these higher standards, there's always a monetary understanding that we can get the hard way, right? And so we have to challenge those old systems of boys will be boys. And then number 4, people typically don't like to take responsibility for stuff. And one of the things that I have so come to understand, particularly through this economic downturn, have you guys heard about that? Is the fact that we are all so connected. And so a problem in my department impacts your department. A problem in my neighborhood ultimately impacts what? Your neighborhood. We had a house across the street that was vacant. Guess what a brother did? He went and cut the grass. Why? It looks like my neighborhood, right? Because if their property goes down, what happens to my property, right? And so oftentimes we really get twisted in thinking that we don't have any effect on other things, or other things aren't interconnected or related, and we're all connected and related. And number 5, disrespect is violence. Disrespect is violence. What is violence? To hurt, to cause hurt to somebody else. What does disrespect do? It hurts. It is violence. One of the most disrespectful things, and I would get on my students all the time about this, is when they would tell each other to shut up. To me, that's vile. That's more vile than any of those other four-letter words or other things. Because what you're saying is your opinion is so dumb you should not exist. So shut up. I don't ever want to hear anything else that you have to say. And that just seems so violent to me, right? So let's go back to number 2. A lot of times what happens with respect is people say, you have to earn my respect. Anybody heard somebody say that? When I would hear students say that to me, Andre, you got to earn my respect. I don't just give it out. You got to earn it. And I say, okay, give me the checklist. Where can I get the final exam for this respect? How do I know that I've done enough to earn your respect? And my conclusion to them was, respect can never be earned. It can only be given. And this is the thing about respect, right? So you have to give respect to people who are being disrespectful to you. It's crazy. Okay, so Mike Tyson, everybody heard of that dude? Boxing, right? I think he coined this kind of phrase that anybody can box until they get punched. Right? Oh, I quit. I'm done. Right? It's easy to love somebody who loves you. Right? It's easy to respect somebody who respects you. But what happens when you're being respectful to someone and they're being disrespectful back to you? It's frustrating. You don't want to be respectful to them anymore. You get angry. What do the people around you say about you? It's 2 things. One is a lot of us are really nosy. We're too nosy. We actually care what other people think about us. And what other people think about us is none of our business. It's none of my business what you think about me. Right? Secondly, if they have any gumption or motivation to make the world a better place, they would be impressed by the fact that you took that mess from that person. You're like, oh my goodness, I cannot believe she was just so respectful to that person that was disrespectful to her. What does that encourage them to do? To do a similar thing, right? I'll get to some other stuff in just a second. So respect can never be earned, it can only be given. And it can and to be stronger in your respect, you have to give it to people who are disrespectful to you. Not because they deserve it, but it says everything about who you are as an individual. All right? Skip that, skip that, skip that, skip that, skip that. We'll come back to this. Yeah, we'll come back to that. No, we'll do it right now. Sorry. I was looking at the time trying to pace myself. So what I'd like for you to do is all of you should have at least something to write with. And I'm going to pass out some cards. So if you pass them down and back, that would be great. categories. So these are people who have taught you about the world, and these are the things that they've, or the people that they've taught you about. All right? So these have been the teachers, and these have been the subjects that they've taught you about. What I'd like for you to do is to put a plus where you've learned something positive. I want you to put a minus where you've learned something negative. And I want you to put a 0 where you've learned nothing. You can have pluses and minuses in the same box. Okay? You can have pluses and minuses in the same box. The size of your plus and the size of your minus determines how much you learn. So a big plus means you learned a lot. A little plus means that you learned a little. Okay? Is that clear? Sort of? Mostly? Clear as mud. All right. How can I help be more specific? So put a plus in each of these that you've learned a plus, something positive, or put a negative in each one that you learned a negative, or a 0 where you've learned nothing. So what did you learn from your friends about Latin Americans? Plus, minus, or 0? What did you learn from TV and movies about disabled Americans? Plus, minus, or negative? Or 0, sorry. Plus, minus, or 0. What did you learn from your personal experience about African Americans? Plus, minus, or 0. The cards do take a bit of tenacity, so I thank you for doing that. And I'll just give you a couple more minutes. Does anyone need something to write with? All right, I'd like for you to stop right where you are. I know many of you haven't had a chance to finish the card. You will have time on your own to finish it. I am not interested, or I don't want to hear what you have positives and negatives in. That's for you to think about, for you to have that conversation with friends and family. I am curious, though, that as you were filling out the box, as you were putting your pluses, your minuses, or your 0s, were there any emotions or thoughts that came up as you were filling that card out? Did anyone have any emotions or thoughts, and what were they as you were filling that card out? Yes, ma'am. Okay. Okay, so you're currently learning about a lot of the genocide that happened as Minnesota kind of was founded in its relationship to Native Americans. All right? Yes, ma'am. Okay. You realize how much you did not learn from your parents and family. All positive, but the TV and movie that you experienced, those were negative experiences. Okay? Yes, sir. Okay, so a lot of yours were positive and negative. All right. Cool, cool, cool. What else? What else were some thoughts? It was emotional. What emotion? Okay. Okay. Anger, mistrust, having been lied to. Other folks.
Which kind of goes along with what she said. She said at her age, she looks back at the things that she watched when she was younger. And I was talking to her about, I feel like maybe a younger generation, I was exposed to a more of an unbiased opinion in the TV, in the movies, with everything. And so I found myself looking at this going, well, am I a superhero and everything? I don't feel like I was ever steered towards, you can see it, but how did I feel? I made my own opinion after watching these things.
Okay. So you felt like everything was kind of balanced and equal as you looked at the world. Okay. Cool. Other folks. What about ignorance?
How ignorant we are when it comes to culture and just for how they interact with us, like nonverbal communication, and sometimes ours is very strong with like a person, a man and man can communicate differently.
Okay. So how we're different in cultures and we're ignorant about those differences. Okay. All right. So this is the circle of all human knowledge. That's very, it's not very big, is it? And that's a little melodramatic, right? So let me, I'll go through this. So this is everything that you know, right? And so for me, this is how much I know, and this is a huge exaggeration of everything that there is to know, right? So, but I know just such a tiny part of everything that there is to know. And then there's another piece that I might cut for myself, and this is what I know I don't know. So this is all the stuff that I'm aware of that I don't know. Like, I know that I don't know Mandarin Chinese. I know that I don't know how to fly a space shuttle. I mean, there are all these things that I am aware of that I don't know, right? So there's what I know and what I know I don't know. And then there's this other piece over here. And this huge area over here is all the stuff that I what? I don't know that I don't know, right? Or I might call that a blind spot. Now, one of the greatest gifts that my parents gave me was this whole thing, and I'll just call this whole thing a paradigm. Or the way you see the world. They gave that to me, right? And where did my parents get their paradigm? From their parents. And where did their parents get theirs from? From their parents, right? Now, what's the problem with this gift that keeps on giving? The majority okay, if somebody brought you a pie with the majority of the pie missing, would you invite them back for another visit? Right? When I look at this card, I realize that there are some things that a lot of people in my family didn't tell me, and there's a lot of stuff that people told me that was false, and that I didn't know, and I'm like, I was tricked into thinking and certain things, but then I realized that they did the best they could with what they had. And then I realized that it is not my fault the situation that the world is in. It's not my fault, the situation that my so-called race is in. That's not my fault. But it is my responsibility. So let's talk about this blind spot, right? How many people have either ridden in a car or driven in a car? Does the car have blind spots? Typically, where are they? Okay, so in the front, on the sides, where else? Right behind you, right? And if you drive a Hummer, the whole thing is a blind spot, right? Are the blind spots your fault? No, they're not your fault. But they are your what? Responsibility. And the funny thing about a blind spot, there's two ways to find out about it. One is to what? Crash into something, right? So have one of these diversity crashes with cultures or misunderstandings with other people. Or you can what? Look for them. When I get a rental car, I have to look for the blind spot. Isn't that weird? And the only way that I'm going to find it is if I look for it. So we have to look for those things in which where we have gaps, where we have zeros. So this isn't an indictment. This is a challenge for learning. This is a lesson plan for you. All right? So the people that we grew up with, our family and our friends, did the best they could with what they had. And it's inadequate. My grandparents didn't know anything about the internet, so they could never tell me how to get a degree in the internet. That's nothing bad on them. They just didn't know. But now we have to start taking responsibility. All right. So ABC has the show on. They do these ethical dilemmas. We're going to watch this clip. Many of you have probably seen this clip before. And then we'll deconstruct it and talk about it and talk about how that applies to us. All right? So here we go.
Hello, and welcome to the opening show of our primetime series, What Would You Do? If you see something and you think it's wrong, do you step in or do you step away? What people say and what they do aren't always the same. That's why our hidden cameras are so revealing. In our first scenario, we weren't sure what to expect when our opinionated man behind the counter meets the Muslim woman in a headscarf. Deep in the heart of Texas, at this little roadside bakery, bigotry is being served with a coffee advantage.
Sir, I have a question.
No, ma'am. We don't serve Muslims here.
I'm sorry.
This is America. We're at war with your people.
I don't know what you think I am. I'm just trying to get an apple.
Well, you're a terrorist, is what you are. So,
Excuse me?
you're going to take your business elsewhere. We don't serve your county.
The other customers at this bakery near Waco seem to hear everything, but they barely look at the Muslim woman, even when the language is tough to take.
Get back on the camel and go back wherever you came from.
Sir, I'm an American. I was born and raised
No,
in
you're
this
not.
country.
Americans don't wear towels on their head.
Muslim Americans say these are words they hear all the time in all parts of the country. But here at the bakery, what the customers don't know is that this Muslim woman and the man behind the counter are actors. The bakery is working with us, all part of a primetime hidden camera experiment on prejudice and patriotism.
Please take your business elsewhere. Am I asking too much?
When no one even tries to help her, she makes a direct appeal.
Sir, would you not order me an apple strudel? That's why I'm here. I can give you the money. I have no problem.
Please, no, sir. I'm not going to let you have it.
But when he gives her the cold shoulder, he finally just leaves. You could have helped her out. You could have spoken up. Why not?
You mean speak up for her? Well, if he would try to dig some arms or something, then I would have.
But why not try to set him straight?
I really think that a person that owns his own business should be able to safely sell to.
She's not American.
Others seem to agree with our actor as to who's an American and who's not. Is it all based on the way we look?
I'm an American citizen. I just would like an apple strudel, please.
Well, I'm sorry. Then why don't you dress like an American? You're
This
so
is
American.
for religious purposes, sir, and I don't think you have any right to say anything.
So I'm religious. I don't wear, Halloween costumes around. I mean, am I wrong here, sir? I run my business the way I want to run it.
My name is John Quinones, and I'm with ABC News. What did you think of what you heard here?
I didn't hear anything racist.
He told her he wouldn't serve her,
Well, he can say he wouldn't serve you. You come in here barefooted without a shirt on.
but she wasn't barefoot or without a shirt on.
Well, she wasn't dressed right.
What do you mean?
If I was running a place, I'd do the same thing.
You wouldn't let Muslims shop at your store?
I sure wouldn't.
We never expected customers to be so candid.
How do I know you don't have a blonde in there?
Watch what happens this time when, once again, our Muslim woman is denied service
This is not right.
and again leaves.
We reserve the right to not serve.
That's right.
Certain kinds.
That's right. That's, I appreciate saying that. I think that's the first time I've ever seen that.
He not only commends the man behind the counter for his discriminatory behavior, but he gives him the thumbs up, not once, but twice,
Good job. All right.
as he leaves.
Can I talk to you, sir, for a second?
But when I approach,
Sir, we're with ABC News.
there is no thumbs up from me.
We staged a little experiment in there to see how people would react to that kind of attitude.
Yeah, I'm American.
I am an American.
That man took it a bit farther, telling me I'm not an American.
He was threatened.
Jack DeVideo is a social psychologist at Yale University.
So when we as Americans feel threatened from the outside, we're going to define ourselves in very rigid fashions. Either you're with me, and if you're not really one of me, then you must be somebody else who's against me.
The young woman in our experiment is an actor, but for this woman, discrimination is all too real. Nahaya Javed helped us design our experiment. Although born in Chicago, she says she's constantly characterized by fellow Americans as the enemy.
You always start off with you're a terrorist, Osama lover, towel head, camel jockey, on and on.
While attending college in Texas, she says she continually suffered verbal abuse and has even been physically attacked just because she's Muslim.
They assume I'm not from here, and if I tell them I'm American, they're like, no, you're not. Just because you were born here doesn't make you American. And I'm like, so what makes you American?
It's a daily battle.
And I don't feel like living in America, I should have to fight this battle.
Meanwhile, back at the bakery, our actor is at it again.
But how do I know you're not a terrorist? Terrorists look like you.
But this time the customers are sympathizing with the Muslim woman.
Right, I know, but can you blame me?
Yeah, I can't blame you, actually.
Why? What's the problem?
Hey, look at that. You go yourself, actually, when you didn't.
Okay, sir. I'm a good American. All right, we're at war with these people.
My dad's a better. Go yourself.
So is mine.
And he's not the only one who walks out in anger.
Excuse me? No, you're a bad American.
Time and again, people speak out with their pocketbooks. But look what happens when this man threatens to leave.
You're not a good American, sir.
I don't believe I am a good American. My son just came back from serving in the Army for over a year in Iraq, and that has nothing to do with her rights.
I understand that, and I hear what you're saying, but
I can't believe you would be so discriminatory. I'm deeply offended by that.
I'm sorry to offend you, sir, but I've got to live with myself.
Seething, the man vows to fight back.
I will let people know this. I've stopped here every time I've come by this place, and I'll never stop here again.
So the rest of the video goes on, and they come to a conclusion that there were 6 people who were negative. There were 13 people who stood up on behalf of the woman, but there were 22 who did or said nothing. So we're going to talk a little bit about this, the -6. We're done at 11:30. Is that correct? 11:45. Okay, good. 'Cause I was getting nervous. So the -6s. What happened? What do we call those people who we might consider -6s that were negative towards this woman in the bakery?
Taxpayers.
We call them taxpayers. Okay. What else do we call them? We call them bigots. We call them prejudiced, racist, violent, ignorant. And when we call them those things, do they go, "Thank you for your diagnosis. Now I can help and get better"? Is that what happens? No. Please raise your hand if you would consider yourself to be a good person. Raise your hand. often forget is that they're connected with other people. They feel like they're disconnected. Did anyone see Marley and Me? That movie about the dog? Okay. I'm gonna spoil it for you. He dies. Okay, just put it out there. If somebody just would have told me, I wouldn't have cried so much. But I still cry, you know. That was a 2 tissue roll movie. And you hate that dog, and then at the end, just like oh. Um, so what happens when I disconnect these negative sixes from me? What happens when they get disconnected from the human family? They do crazy stuff, like not let this lady have apple strudel. Really? I'm like, the world, he's doing justice. He's fighting Al Qaeda because this woman can't have apple strudel. Whoa! Right? They get disconnected. And I was watching Marley and Me, and it made me think about this. I don't have cable, but if I could have cable, there are 3 channels that I would get: the History Channel, the Discovery Channel, and Cartoon Network. Cartoon. I love cartoons. But I'm watching the Discovery Channel, and they're following this pack of wolves, right? And they show them as puppies, and they're wrestling and tussling and all this kind of stuff. And then they show as they mature, and then they show towards the end they're getting ready for the hunt. And I can't remember if it was an elk or a moose that they were going to hunt, but the pack had it had its strategies, and you got like Merlin Perkins talking about all the strategies of the wolves. I don't know how they know what the wolves' strategies are or whatever, but they're doing this. They're doing the play-by-play, and the wolves are they're going this way and that way and surrounding the moose, and one of the wolves jumps up on the moose, and the moose kicks him. Boom! Breaks his leg. What's the wolf's destiny now? Death. Because there's no hospitals, there's no ERs in the forest, right? So what does this wolf decide? He knows his destiny is death. The rest of the pack knows that his destiny is death. So what does he do? He leaves the pack. And why does he leave the pack? He doesn't want to bring them down. The pack is only as strong as its weakest member. And so he goes off ultimately to what? To die. When we call our family members, our friends, our neighbors, these nasty, horrible names because they're exhibiting this behavior, what are we doing to them? We're pushing them out of the pack. And we are such, wolves are social animals, but we're so much more social animals that if we get kicked out of a pack, what do? We find another pack. And where do these sick wolves end up finding other packs? With packs of other sick wolves. And then they start breeding. And so now we got this whole new branch of sick wolves that are breeding. Some people said they were good people. Who said they were a good person? Raise your hand again. Okay, cool. Good people. Because one of the things I think is really funny is that, and it's not you guys. I know you guys don't do this, but other good people cut these people off because they say, I can't have that language around my children. I can't, that hurts my ears. They're so vile. That's what some good people say, not you guys, other good people, right? But this is what I learned, right? So in my house, the kitchen was where we all congregated. We all would hang out in the kitchen. And so one day my mom was cooking fish. She was frying fish. And because that's where we all congregated, we did our homework there. We had an ironing board there. You laid your clothes out for school the next day there. And I made this huge mistake of doing that. I had my clothes sitting on the ironing board as my mother is cooking this fish. So I don't think anything of it. I iron my clothes. I'm looking fresh, creases, the whole nine. And I go to school and I smell like what? Fish. Why do I smell like fish? Because I left my clothes in the kitchen. the people who are around you smell like? Do they smell like you? I mean, the good people. Do they smell like you? What would happen if I gave an orange tree orange juice as its only source of nourishment? What would happen to that orange tree? It would die. Why? What's that? It's acidic. It needs what? Water. The oranges are not for the orange tree. A lot of times we isolate ourselves and say, I'm such a good person, or I have such strong morals, and I have to keep that to myself. That one of the things that like really confuses me about our Western society is that we believe that our talents are for us. It's to make me rich, or it's to make me successful. Your talents are not for you. They are for somebody else. The oranges are not for the orange tree. They're for you. And so sometimes we get so caught up in our own selves and our own righteousness that we're so good and so right that we don't use our gifts to bring those other people along. The negative sixes can never get better if they're not next to somebody like us. Now, I'm not saying you don't have standards. I'm not saying that you have to take stuff that is way crazy. But I will tell you that if we cut these people off, they will go breed and create other sick wolves. Here's an example. So I live in Mounds View, and many of you may have heard the story if you've heard me speak before. But Mounds View is not a mecca of diversity. There aren't a lot of diverse people there, right? So I go in to grab an early lunch, and so I always look for my signs of safety, kind of like women do, where can I park, where can I not park, who's there, and all this stuff. So I go in, and I see at the end of the bar, there's this dude who's all red-faced. Now, this is probably 11:30, so it's still pretty early in the day. But this dude is like red-faced and drunk. It's just crazy. He's sitting at the end of the bar. I'm sitting, at the other end, and I'm ordering my stuff. I close my menu and give it back to the staff. The dude has moved from the end of the bar next to me. And I'm like, Now, I don't know about you. I can fight, so I'm not afraid of anything. Right? But drunk people are just unpredictable. You never know what is going to happen, right? So I just kind of prepare myself. I take a deep breath. And so I'm sitting there. And so we just start chatting, because that's what we do in Minnesota. We just start to chit-chatting. And so, we chit-chat for a while about sports and other stuff. And then he breaks into his thesis for sitting next to me. And he says, and excuse my language, but he says, I don't like niggers. And I'm not quite sure how to respond to that, right? And so I asked him, I said, well, when you say that word, what do you mean? Describe it. He said, well, what I mean is ignorant, uneducated, uncool, ghetto. And so he had all this list of negative stuff. And I said, well, do you know any white people who fit that description? And he goes, yeah, I do. And then I said, how about those twins? So we start talking about the twins and that kind of stuff. And then he turns to me later and he says, you know what? I don't like niggers, but I like you. Again, I'm not sure. What am I supposed to do with that, right? So I said, well, what is it about me that you like? And he says to me, you're really cool. You got a good head on your shoulders. You're educated. You're articulate. All these positive things. And so I say to him, what if all the people that you have met who you think look like me were idiots, and everybody else that you haven't met yet is just like me? And he says, I got to pee. So he gets up, and he goes to pee. And I'm like, so I get my tab, I'm ready to go. I start heading out the door, and then all of a sudden, guess who meets me at the door coming out of the bathroom? It's this guy, right? But he looks a little bit different. His hair is combed over to the side. There's, little water droplets and stuff. And he hands me this damp napkin. And he says, I raise chickens, and if you ever need fresh eggs, give me a call. goes his way, do I give him a call? No, I don't give him a call. But what's the point in that? Would I have been within my rights to give this guy a piece of my mind? Yeah. If I'd have punched him in the nose, would anybody other than lawyers been upset with me for doing that? Probably not. But had I done that, what would I have done for him? I would have validated everything that he said or everything that he thought. Right? And so sometimes in our rightness, we don't humble ourselves enough to help people get over their own stuff. The negative 60s. The 13s, I love these cats because they're courageous, they are connected, and they find allies. They know how we're related. And courage, at the center of courage is what? Fear. You cannot have courage if you do not have fear. And I mean fear in both in that emotional anxiety that we have about the unknown, that fear, as well as the reverence that we have for the obstacle that we're coming against. The respect, the fear of that thing, right? And so what courage is taking that fear, gathering all your resources, practicing it, and being able to do it in spite of your fear. That's courage, right? And lastly, the 22. Now the 22 are very interesting because they are fearful. They're the silent majority, and we also refer to them sometimes as Minnesota Knights. All right? But I want to show you some examples of the 22. So what I'm going to do is pass out a card. And at the top of the card is ABC. Yep, and on the bottom is 1, 2, 3. And what is that a picture of in letter A? Okay, a bird eating a man. Or a bird eating a hippo. Or a lamb. Okay. I will also offer to you that there is an island with 2 trees and a person in a canoe as well as a fish. So there's a fish, a person in a canoe, 2 trees, and an island. Your paradigm, the way you see the world, will determine what you're able to see. All right? And so you have to be physically active in changing your paradigm. Because if you don't change your paradigm, someone will give you a paradigm. All right? So I want you to go to number 3, which is at the bottom of the card, number 3. And number 3, I want you to look for what looks like a hat, a top hat. Does anyone see that top hat? All right? I want you to look for what looks like an arrow. Does anyone see that arrow? All right, cool. Oh, I want you to tell me how the arrow and the hat relate to American history. How does the hat relate to American history? Abraham Lincoln. Okay? How does the arrow relate to American history? American Indians, Native Americans, right? Okay, cool. Is there anything else in that picture that can actually provide us with concrete information? The word fly, capital F, capital L, capital Y. If you turn your card so that the bird's beak is pointing towards the ceiling, and you draw a line under all those shapes and over all those shapes, you will see white letters on a black background that say fly. Some people see it, some people don't, and some people are faking it, and it's okay. But for those people who didn't see it, who currently see it, what was the barrier to being able to see the word fly?
Looking at the black versus the white.
Looking at the black. And why were you looking at the black?
It looked more like an object.
It looked more like an object? Okay, what else? Why else were you looking at the black? Because the box is white. Because it is a dominant.
Black is the dominant.
Black is a dominant. Okay. But why are you looking at the black?
You pointed him out.
Because I told you to. Is it possible that the people have told you about the world, had told you about a world that's designed to benefit whom? Themselves. So how do you know if you should be looking for the word fly or seeing shapes? How do you know that stuff? First, you must have a goal for yourself. And secondly, there's a little voice inside of you that you should listen to when it starts speaking. Because the second thing I asked you to do was tell me what? How these shapes relate to American history. Do these shapes have anything to do with American history? No. How many people knew that? How many people knew that they didn't have anything to do with American history, that this dude is crazy? What is he talking about? How many people thought that? Raise your hand if you thought that. Nobody thought that. How many people said something about it? 22. I'm not asking you to pick it. I'm not asking you to pick fights. I'm not asking you to do anything. I am asking you to be my ally. Because you can fight wars for me and fight battles for me that I will never know exist. And I'm not talking about fighting with strangers. I mean talking about fighting with your friends and your family. Ask the questions. Have the conversations. Men, how many times have we talked with other men about the impact of male behavior and sexism? How many race conversations have we had in our own homes or with our friends and families? I want you to fight for me because I'm always fighting for you. My name is Andre Cohen. Thank you so much for your time. If you have any questions, comments, observations, I'm open to receive those. What's that?
You're as good as the fun nun.
I'm as good as the fun nuns? All right. So I should last another 23 years. Huh? Who will be here then? You're so very welcome.
Oh, this is the one that I.
Good to see you again.
I understand. We have 7.